Sarah from The Upcoming, lovely to meet you both. So for people who don't know the story, maybe you can briefly summarise what The Aftermath's all about.
We don't want to blow it. What is it about? It's about a married couple who've spent the war apart, and they're British, so they don't talk about anything. And they've both been through an extremes of experience. The husband is a soldier; he's been through some dark stuff, and the wife, the mother, Kira's character, has. Is this a plot point? Has lost a child during the Blitz, and this is something they've never actually been able to. They've never had the opportunity to deal with, and it gets dealt with in a way I don't think either of them expected, and it gets and at that point Alex Skarsgård is involved in how that situation is resolved, and I think Anna and I are married, and we're a married writing couple, and this was a chance to write about a marriage in a way that you don't often see in films. I think in certainly in most romantic dramas, the marriage is the obstacle to true happiness, and that's not necessarily the case here. It's a slightly more complicated triumvirate. So
I think on so many levels, the story was interesting to us, not just because we're married, but because there's a human story of a woman who has suffered this unimaginable loss, who hasn't had her husband around to deal with it, and even if he had been around, maybe they wouldn't have been able to deal with it. As I imagine, that kind of grief is hard to get to the, to heal. And she is not only subjected to that experience alone, but she's then called after 2 years to be with her husband again, in the country filled with her mortal enemies, the people who've caused her son's death. And how do you deal with that? And then she arrives in this obliterated city, which has been razed by the British bombers, the Allied bombers. So there's so many levels of human discomfort and misery, and all of these stories sort of collide in our film. And I think her story takes us through that, and through the experiences that everybody has been through. And I think she has to start seeing her enemy as human, and I think that's a message.
The way she does that is by falling very much in love with him.
Yeah, but it's still a message that we could listen to now. I think we live in a time that's interesting. We're pulling away from Europe. This film is about rebuilding Europe, and that will resonate, I'm sure.
Make the pretending easy. Hey! You can have a hug. Go on. Fancy meeting you here. I know, what are you doing here? It's great. Oh, you're right. Good, lovely. You ever seen it?
For me, it's a story of marriage, which is, we're married screenwriters, and that was what drew us to the project in the first place. I think it's a story about you're dealing with the aftermath of a very, very virulent conflict, and I think the world that all these characters emerge into is a world where, okay, so we won, but now what? And I think that, if you're looking for a political angle, is exactly what is relevant about now, is that we have never been more divided, and yet this is a story about what unites us way more than what divides us. So I think that's the topical answer. The universal answer is that it's a story about a marriage, and it's a story about what makes us human, and it's a story about love and passion and the dark side of love, and what happens when love sours, and then can that ever be saved? So I think that even though it's a very specific period of history, I feel that it's a universal story, and that's what drew us to it in the first place. I don't know whether you'd agree.
I totally agree. I think
she totally agrees. It's easy.
And politically, it has become quite interesting. Obviously, we're living through an unknown time in terms of the way Europe is going to evolve. And this film is focused at a moment when we were trying to rebuild Europe and to unite Europe after the most catastrophic event. It's also, as Joe says, the story, the microcosm of that, the story of a marriage which has suffered the worst possible grief. And I found that, I think, the story playing out on those two levels very interesting and connected emotionally to it. And that's what we tried to do with the screenplay. And when we adapted Rhidian's novel, Rhidian had so much of that in there, and there were so many great ideas and plots and characters, and we had to just try and extract the DNA of what he was doing and make that work for a very narrow-shouldered beast, which is a movie. What do you mean, the character? How the character evolves? Well, she is playing a character at a time when emotions weren't discussed very much, and she's gone through something that's unimaginable to most people. So she has to deal with immense grief with a man who she's married to but hasn't seen for 2 years. He has been through enormous trauma, having fought in the Second World War. And they've lived these terrible experiences separately. And so for her, it's a story about coming back to a marriage that has changed irrevocably. Changed, and she has to learn how to live in that marriage again, and to live in a country which, frankly, is, when she first arrives in Germany, is full of her enemies. Her enemies have caused her the unimaginable pain she has suffered. So having to kind of accept that the people she interacts with in this country are actually human beings who've had their own experience and not just an enemy. I think it's a very interesting message for now, for obvious reasons. You know, we are in a strange, polarized time, and I think observing each other as human beings is the most important thing we can do.
No, and I think from our earliest conversations with Kira, she was fascinated to delve into the most unimaginable horror for a mother, which is part of,
and she just had a baby.
Character. Yeah,
she just had a baby,
and so there was an incredible
I think
bravery.
it was the first part she played. I don't know this; you'd have to corroborate this, but the first part she played since having a child, and so we have 2 sons. So I think you do experience differently how you're going to play a mother who's lost a child, which is what's happened to me. So it was very interesting, the conversations we had with her at script stage, ideas she had, the way she wanted to get into the character. We talked a lot to her about that, and she was just immaculate, I think. She was wonderful.
As a writer, that's all you hope for, isn't it? To says, all right, great, let's take this, let's really take this plunge. She didn't want to hide from anything. No.
She
wasn't
wanted
afraid
to get into the rawness of that experience, and she wanted to really go there, and that's what we tried to do for her. I think she is amazing. I feel a bit bad when I cry at our own scenes. It's bad as laughing at your own jokes, but this film makes me cry every time I've seen a cut of it. Every time I read the script back to ourselves.
It's a testament to the performances.
It's moving. It's about how a marriage survives unimaginable loss and trauma, and the strength of love. And I think at a time when we're pulling away from Europe and our neighbours, this is a film about trying to rebuild Europe and trying to rebuild the commonality between us and the humanity that does connect us. I think as a film, it's the story of a marriage, whether a marriage can survive, and it's also the story of a passionate love affair, which is an obstacle to that marriage, but also a fun thing to watch.
It's about, can a marriage survive this? Can a country survive war? It's about rebuilding and rebirth, and it's hopefully the audience will be, as we were, wondering where Kira's heart will lean towards the end of the movie.
Kira had to actually play 2 very emotional scenes, completely conflicting with different actors, so she was just incredible. She sort of retreated and put her headphones on and was, had to stay in character to just get through it. But she was amazing. Then I thought, wow, we've got a perfect person to play.
Frankly, the structure of the story is completely destroyed if you don't have 3 characters giving that much of themselves and 3 beautiful performances. The nature of the story is such that if you don't fall in love with all 3 of them, it's not going to work for you. So we were blessed and delighted to have the 3 of them.